Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben here. I'm back again today doing another video. In today's video, we're going to be focusing on the rise and fall of the Big Four Boston Celtics era. So if you haven't been keeping up with the channel at all, or if you haven't seen my videos before, I am currently working through a rise and fall series about NBA contenders, how they rose to contention, how they plateaued, and how they ultimately started falling apart. So I've been focusing mostly on like lesser talked about eras for different teams, but today I'm talking about a more famous one, which is the Boston Celtics between 2007 and 2013. It's a pretty interesting one. It's been covered a lot, but I still want to go through it as well. So, just some background on this before we get going. Up top, you'll see the season that I'm referring to. Top left, you'll see the team's record, their seed that year, how they finished in the playoffs, their offense and defensive ranking. And then below, you'll see regular season stats on the left for individuals and playoff stats on the right. So I've highlighted games played, minutes played per game, field goal attempts per game, and field goal percentage. Same for three-pointers and free throws, then total rebounds, assists, blocks, steals, or assist steals, blocks, and points per game. So this season is really the first one of this era. You already had Paul Pierce and Rondo in Boston, but they in the offseason had traded for both Ray Allen and Kevin Garnett at this point, and then you really had a big four of Garnett, Allen, and Pierce, who were all still all-star caliber players in their very early 30s, but still all-star caliber, and then also a young budding Rajon Rondo who wasn't really all-star caliber yet this season, but was still a pretty good player for them. You also had supporting pieces like Posey, Kendrick Perkins, Eddie House, and Tony Allen as the main supporting pieces here. Big Baby Davis, Leon Poe, and Sam Cassell I included as well, just because they weren't as big of pieces in the rotation, but they still were visible, present pieces to the team. And you had pretty balanced scoring, as you can see, between their three main guys. They were really good defensively between Garnett and Kendrick Perkins and Rondo being the main staples on defense. Pierce and Allen were okay, but the main staples were the three I mentioned, and then also Tony Allen off the bench and Leon Poe were pretty good defenders as well. They got to the playoffs, actually struggled quite a bit in the first and second rounds. They went to 7 games with a 37-win Hawks team, then went to 7 games with a 45-win Cavs team. The Pistons pushed them to 6 in the conference finals, and then in the finals, the Lakers without Andrew Bynum pushed them to 6 again too. So they certainly didn't have a cakewalk in winning this title, and actually struggled quite a bit in the playoffs throughout. But they still got good performances out of Garnett, Ray Allen, and Pierce. Rondo played. Everybody basically played pretty well in the playoffs. Nobody fell off at all, and basically we saw like what a team can do who has three All Stars still in their prime, along with like really really good supporting pieces. Going into the next season, this team was still really good. Finished with 62 wins as the second seed. Had a really good offense and defensive rating. Their only problem was that Garnett got injured part of the way through the year, missed the end of the season, and was out for all of the playoffs. So they were without him. And guys like Kendrick Perkins and Big Baby had to play more than they were used to. And they also signed a guy named Mikey Moore, as you'll see on the left, who played down the stretch. And they also traded for Stephon Marbury at the deadline, who I have pictured top right, just because I find the Stephon Marbury Celtics outfit just so weird. Feels so foreign to see him in a Celtics jersey, but I just find it amusing as well. Most of the same supporting cast, Glenn Davis, Tony Allen, Eddie House, Leon Poe. The only big guy who left was James Posey, who was like their sixth man. But you still had Paul Pierce, Ray Allen, and Rondo playing up to their usual expectations. Kendrick Perkins having one of his better years on the Celtics, putting up 8.5 points and 8 rebounds. They lost to Orlando barely in the second round in 7 games, and you got to think if they had Garnett, they probably would have gotten farther in the playoffs. But if you look at their playoff stats, Rondo was really the guy that stepped up, having 17 points per game, 10 rebounds, 10 assists, playing really well. Kendrick Perkins also stepping up with 12 points per game, 12 rebounds, and Big Baby Davis out of anybody, it really probably stepping up the most, getting up to 16 points per game, up from 7 in the regular season. And I remember he played really well against Chicago, who they played in the first round in one of the best playoff series of all time. Yeah, so if you basically the downfall of this season was Garnett going out with injury late in the regular season. Now we get into the 2009 to 10 season where they actually probably you'd say took quite a step back as far as contention in that their offense was quite a bit worse and their defense was still pretty good though. And they dropped from a 62 win team to a 50 win team. Everybody's getting a bit older. Garnett kind of came back and was still good, but not like um, prime Garnett anymore. He was like clearly out of his prime by this point. You had, I'd say this is like the first true Big Four season where you have Rondo. I think this is his first All Star season. Um, he's playing pretty well with 14 points per game, 4 rebounds, 10 assists, 2 steals. Pierce and Allen basically still themselves. Kendrick Perkins, pretty solid season for him. Rasheed Wallace was a really underrated pickup for them. He's pictured top right. He was a really good like sixth man for this team. And they had a really good bench with him, Marquise Daniel, who was another underrated pickup. And then they still kept their pretty good pieces like Davis, House, and Allen. And then they picked up Nate Robinson too at the trade deadline, which was a good pickup as well. He didn't play much for them, but he was a solid pickup. Um, in the playoffs, they got to the finals once again, where they had beaten some of their previous foes in the earlier rounds, like Cleveland and Orlando. And they ultimately lost to Lakers in the finals, but some people attribute that to Kendrick Perkins being injured in the game 6 of the finals and not being able to be there. One of their starters, of course. I think that you could say that, but also like at the same time, I just think that they just lost, but they just lost barely, and they shouldn't feel terrible about it. Again, Rondo's stats jumped up in the playoffs, up to 6 rebounds a game, and 16 points. Pierce and Ray Allen again played pretty well. Garnett played pretty well. Everybody played pretty well. This team is not one that ever really had any major statistical fall off so far, as far as guys performing well. Um, yeah, they were a really solid team, and people were at this point maybe thinking they were falling off a little bit when they didn't do as well in the regular season, but in the playoffs they really showed that they were still a major player in the NBA. Going into 2010 to 11, of course, this is the year when we had the big three form, and so the Celtics thought that they had to retool a lot as well. So on top of the talent that this team had, they also brought in Shaq for them to play center. They brought in Jermaine O'Neal as his backup, and so you actually had a really deep front court in that you had the starters being Garnett and Shaq, and then you had backup center Kendrick Perkins, and third string center Jermaine O'Neal, who's probably one of the better third string centers in NBA history. And then you brought in Delonte West. You still had Nate Robinson. They still had Marquise Daniel. And then also, as you might note, a big deal for this team was midway through the season, they dealt Kendrick Perkins and Nate Robinson basically for Jeff Green, who was at the time, I believe, like 24. And they were like, what could be really useful is another good, like, wing dynamic scorer. So they brought in Jeff Green. He actually didn't play much in the regular season, only 23 and a half minutes a game and only 10 points a game. But um, they thought he would kind of be the bridge to their future as he was putting up like 16 points a game in Oklahoma City. Again, very balanced scoring for this team between Allen, Pierce, Garnett, Rondo, Big Baby Davis. Very balanced. Um, Defense again really good. Offense was just kind of in the middle as you kind of had, you know, Garnett wasn't really much on offense anymore, and Allen and Pierce were decent, but they were like really the main scorers for this team. So that's another reason why they thought they had to bring in Jeff Green. You get to the playoffs, and Shaq barely played at all, as you'll see, 2 games, 6 minutes a game. So they had traded away Perkins at this point, and they really needed Jermaine O'Neal, the third stringer, to step up and be their starting center. So he did step up, and really they just struggled from having, it sounds weird, but a lack of depth between losing Nate Robinson and Perkins and Shaq being injured. Those were 3 guys who were, you know, presences in the regular season who weren't there in the playoffs. Um, Glenn Davis played pretty awful too. If you look at his stats, under 40% from the field for a guy who basically only shoots in the paint is really bad. Um, Everybody else played actually fine. It was just that they basically had some injuries, and Miami was just basically a better team with more talented, younger guys. Going into the next year, the team lost Shaq as he retired. They still had Jermaine O'Neal. They lost Big Baby Davis to a trade, and they got back Brandon Bass, who basically was going to fill the same role. And they got in rookie Avery Bradley. And actually, a big detriment to this team was that they didn't have Jeff Green because he had a heart surgery, and so he was out for actually the entire season. And you'll see their offense actually struggled quite a bit as a result. Ray Allen was getting a bit older. Paul Pierce was still decent, but um, getting older. Garnett, same thing, decent but getting older. No more Shaq, no more Nate Robinson, who, although they didn't play a ton the year before, were still offensively still gifted guys who could give you spurts of effectiveness. No Jeff Green, who was a guy who was expected to give them about 15 points per game. So they basically had to make up that offense between like Mikhail Petrus and rookie Avery Bradley, who weren't really equipped to be great dynamic offensive players at this point. So their offense was bad, but again, their defense was still really good between Garnett, Brandon Bass, and Rondo. Um, Jermaine O'Neal played for this team 25 games, and then I believe they released him just because he wasn't really playing that great, and they didn't necessarily need him that much at this point. And I believe he was battling some injuries this season as well, so they ended up releasing him. This was the lockout shortened season, of course, and in the playoffs, they were the 4 seed. They played Miami in the Eastern Conference Finals because you had Chicago go out in the first round, and so they got to play the 8 seeded Philadelphia in the second round, who they actually went to 7 games with, but won. And then they lost to Miami in 7 games, and of course, again, they had them on the ropes down. The Celtics were up 3-2, but again, I feel like the Heat were just more talented. Bosh, Wade, and LeBron were just the younger, better team with more talent at this point. Rondo actually played great. 17 points, 7 rebounds, 12 assists. That was his stat line in the playoffs. Pierce actually kind of struggled as far as efficiency, shooting under 39% from the field in the playoffs. Ray Allen under 40%. And, he was only putting up like 11 points per game, so he was not playing great. Um, this roster just kind of starting to really show its age, but still kind of had like one last hurrah, and this was it, getting a game away from the finals. And then we flow into 2012 to 13, where they had lost Ray Allen to free agency, and they brought in Jason Terry, pictured top right, to replace him. And you'll see their record. They actually didn't play a full 82 games because a terrible thunderstorm and I think kind of like mini tsunami came through Atlanta right around then. And their last regular season game was supposed to be against Atlanta, but they didn't get to play it, so they just finished with a 81 win record. And this team had started to really fall off at this point. Garnett still still okay, but really much more of like a supporting piece. Pierce still putting up like about 19 points a game, but really he shouldn't be taking that many shots per game at this point. Jeff Green came back and played okay, 13 points per game, but still kind of living in the shadow of Pierce, who was trying to be the main man. Rondo probably had his best raw statistical season, putting up 14, 6, 11, and 2 steals per game. Jason Terry, okay supporting piece at 10 points per game. Um, but yeah, this team was really starting to show its age, and Avery Bradley was trying to step up and be like a bridge with Jeff Green, but he wasn't really cut out for that lead role as well. And in the playoffs, they rode the starters hard. Played Jeff Green 43 minutes, played Pierce 43 minutes, played Garnett 35. Um, they actually didn't have Rondo for the playoffs at all, which basically sank the season. But Pierce played pretty bad in the playoffs, like 37% from the field. So this was just really the end of the line, and they didn't have many people they could count on at this point. And with Rondo out, the team's spirit was basically shot. So that was the 6 year span of the Big Four Celtics, and if I had to really sum up why this team ended up falling short of, some people thought that this was a dynastic team that, or at least they had dynasty potential, and to only have one finals win out of that was kind of shocking to a lot of people. But if you had to boil it down, '08 to '09, the Garnett injury sinks the season. This last year, as you can see on screen, not having Rondo in the playoffs really sunk them, along with the core just really aging out. And yeah, overall, I think that's just a big reason too. Like just the team overall aging out of where they were really like a prime contender. Like Pierce, Garnett, and Ray Allen, they were early 30s when they started this thing. So add 6 years to that, and I think by the end of this, you had like a 37-year-old Garnett, like a 35-year-old or 36-year-old Pierce, and like a 36-year-old Ray Allen. So yeah, they were really out of their primes at the end, towards the end of this thing. Um, and a lot of their big swings as far as free agent and off-season acquisitions never really panned out. Like acquiring Shaq didn't really do anything for them. Jermaine O'Neal played okay, but really was more of a backup at this point, so his acquisition didn't do much. Nate Robinson went from putting up 17 points in New York to basically putting up like 5 per game in Boston, where, they expected him to be more of a spark plug off the bench. When they acquired Jason Terry, at this point he was really much past his prime, and even the biggest swing of all, which was probably the Jeff Green acquisition. Um, he missed an entire season the year before this, 2012 to 13. He missed all of 2011 to 12, so that was a huge blow. And even when he came back this year, he was only putting up 13 points per game, and they really expected like potentially all-star level play from him, but he just really wasn't that. So if I had to weigh it or boil it down to three things, I would say like some unfortunate injuries between Garnett in '09 and Rondo in 2013, and then the core aging out, and then a bunch of like splashy free agency and trade moves that really didn't amount to much of anything. And there you have it, guys. That was really the rise and fall of the Celtics and how their core became a contender, how they plateaued, and then how they ultimately faded in the end. Hope you enjoyed the video. Check out some others on the playlist if you're interested, and I will see you next time. Bye.